What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with The Boys Dear Becky, and with Season 3 basically done, hopefully this will satisfy your need for boys-related content. But what this does is this initially picks up with Billy Butcher and Becky, and what we end up getting is, of course, them kind of in a pool hall. Now, one of the things to know is that when it came to Becky and Billy Butcher, it's kind of easy to look at the life of Billy Butcher at this point in time and believe that his life is perfect, but the reality here is Becky's going to hit on some stuff that he's still dealing with. And it's actually things that won't really come to bear until we basically end up getting into the main boys series itself. But of course, the two of them are basically in a pool hall, kind of enjoying a bit of witty banter between the two of them. And of course, she's busting his balls because he makes this joke where he talks about how it's girls against the guys in pool and women suck at pool. And so Becky pours water on his crotch and it makes it look like he pissed his pants. And then she's like, so what are you going to do? You're going to sit here and you're going to mope around about the fact that you look like you pissed your pants and be embarrassed, or you're going to do something? And Billy Butcher, ever the man's man, gets up, just pants for the world to see, and just starts playing some pool. Which is exactly how you're supposed to act in this situation. And so again, this kind of funny banter that goes back and forth. One thing to understand, there's a lot of love between the two of them here, right? There is a lot of love and a lot of connection between the two of them. And so of course, once this banter's over with and the game kind of gets finished, Billy Butcher takes her back home and does the deed. But the following morning when they wake up, and this is really the important thing here, because remember, where you have Billy Butcher in bed by himself here, that's him in the present at the story's being as the story's being told, where he's just kind of thinking back on all these memories that he has with Becky. But one of the things that happens is that in the aftermath, right, the next morning when it's him and Becky, of course, she's taking a bath and they're just kind of reading the paper and that sort of stuff. One of the things she talks about is the internal struggle people deal with. And when it comes to a lot of the younger kids that she works with and things like that, what she points out here is that the things they've been through, the things they've seen, right, abuse and violence and all that kind of stuff, it never goes away, right? It never stops being a part of them. That the reality is there are times, especially when you're younger, the world is going to show you a part of itself that you were just never meant to see at that age. And the reality is it's going to change you. It's going to become an irrevocable part of you. It can't be fixed. It can't be eliminated. The best you can do is learn to live with it and try to live the best life you possibly can. It's why they always say that bad parents are the ones that screw their kids up for the rest of their lives, because that's usually what happens, right? Like a parent makes some ridiculous decision or silly decision in the moment. They pawn it off on the idea, well, there's no handbook on how to be a parent, and they basically screw up their kids for the rest of their lives. So as a result of that, Billy Butcher kind of hears this and really recollects on his own experiences, both fighting in the war, right? Fighting in the Falklands, I think is what it was, as well as just his experiences in fighting like gangs and things like that. And what he's learned is that over the course of his life, because of his childhood, these traumas he's experienced have come to the surface from time to time. The war effort that he was in was almost the best time for it to be there. And it's one of those things where you would kind of look at that and say, okay, so he's got like a finite amount of just personal struggle in him. And when he's in a conflict like war, he can kind of regurgitate it all out. But the reality is that it's endless, right? It is an infinite thing. So there's no conflict out there that would be of such a degree that would allow him to finally get it all out. That's never going to happen, right? It just keeps coming and coming. And so it's one of those things where he kind of hears what she says and it becomes important later on down the line. But in a lot of ways, Becky's very important to him because Becky is what anchors him to reality and keeps him from going too far off the deep end. But of course, with Becky out of the picture having died, it's no wonder how it is that Billy Butcher ended up becoming so sadistic and so violent and really just a straight up sociopath or psychopath when it came to the boys series. And so what you end up doing is switching over to Julianne Baxter Pugh. Now again, one of the things to remember when it comes to Dear Becky is this doesn't necessarily focus on Vaught American as a whole, although it kind of does. That what you have is you have basically the superhero division, right? Superhero development for Vaught American. Those are the ones that basically find individuals out there who have superpowers that are marketable, because it's one thing to have abilities, it's another to be a person with marketable abilities, because Vaught American is all about making money. And so superhero development are the ones, they find those heroes that are marketable, they bring them in, they give them a story, a new identity, an origin, all that kind of stuff, and they send them out there on some kind of a team. And depending on how they resonate with the general public, that they could increase in popularity, and as that goes on, they could possibly become part of the Seven or something like that. What Julian Baxter Pugh did is he was brought in by Vaught American for reasons that weren't explicitly made clear outside of the fact that maybe some strings were pulled, but he was part of MediaCorp, and that what he's doing is basically, or at least he has his own kind of plan that we'll talk about here in a minute, but basically he's creating rifts in Vaught American, and so there's a bit of turmoil going on inside Vaught itself. And so what happens is there's this kind of debate that happens on national TV where basically it's Julian Baxter Pugh against another guy. And they're talking about the nature of these superheroes, right? The team, the Scorchers that's out there, and they all kind of have offensive names. And it's really interesting the way that Julian plays this, because what he does here is instead of like defending the names as just being like, well, I mean, they're only offensive because you see it that way. Instead, what he does is the guy who's claiming these names are offensive, he paints that guy out to be a villain. What happens here, and what he says is, you're dismissing this as like homophobia and racism is like a bit of fun, right? That's the question that's being asked of Julian Pugh, right? And even the guy who's arguing with him says, because that's the same excuse that you've used to defend the kind of journalism that you've peddled back in the UK. The same chirpy, cheery, and frankly quite nauseating stuff. And so when the mediator kind of asks, like, that's a good point, what's your counter argument to this point? This is when Julian Baxter Pugh pulls this just amazing moment and makes this guy out to be the villain. And what he says is, well, that was certainly Mr. Tatchell's line when we crossed swords on the BBC, and I'll say the same thing now that I said to him then. Calm down, no one's trying to offend anyone. But there is a point I would like to raise here, and that's that these heroes all chose their own names, which of course we know isn't true. But he says they all chose their own names. When Tatchler starts to interrupt him, he says, well, let me finish first, right? And he says, the moment a superhero takes his name comes at a crucial point in their origin process. He'll have undergone a good deal of trial and frustration as his powers develop, possibly even trauma as well. It's regarded as well as quite a sacred moment by many in the superhuman community. And so the question of the moderator is, so you're saying that we need to be more respectful? And his response is, yes, I am. If anything else, I think it's a great opportunity for us to begin a conversation about boundaries. And so what Julian Baxter Pugh has done here is, instead of being on the defense and saying, well, no, it's look, it's not that racist. Look, it's not that bad. Instead of doing that, it's no, here's the issue. What you're doing is you're saying these people who are taking this name and making it their identity, you're saying it's wrong, and you're saying they're wrong. What you're doing is you're saying the world can believe whatever it wants to believe as long as I agree with it. That's a huge amount of arrogance and narcissism. You are not that important, and you never were. I'm sorry if you tricked yourself into believing that, but that's not the case. You are as irrelevant as anybody else out there. So how dare you come to somebody out there and say you are wrong for choosing that name for yourself and tying that name to your identity, and the entire basis behind this is because I find it offensive. It's a really, really great argument, and it paints them out to be the bad guys. Like I said, it's a great way to win those kinds of arguments. Don't go on the defense, make them go on the defense. Go on the offense, right? Just become rabid. Make them look like the villains here. Make them justify how their case is anything other than being narcissistic, and then in turn, watch them completely fold in on themselves and collapse under the weight of their own arrogance. It's a great stance to take. And so the funny thing here is that the boys in them are kind of like, with them knowing Julian Baxter Pugh, seeing what he's about, and knowing what Vaught American is, they're like, okay, this is kind of ridiculous, right? Like, none of this, like, all of this is nonsensical. But notice here, Baxter Pugh is not trying to win over Billy Butcher and those guys. He's trying to win over the general public, and he's doing it. He's successfully doing so. And so it's a really interesting thing, because having this conversation saying we need to talk about boundaries and all that kind of stuff, Billy Butcher and them see right through it. But they're also smarter than the average bear, and they're holding all the cards. They know everything about Vaught American. They know how crooked they are. They know how corrupt they are. The general public doesn't. The average person would like to believe they're holding all the cards, but they're not. They never really know exactly everything that's going on, even with regards to their own arguments. They just think they do. And so it's cool because it kind of pisses off Billy Butcher for a second, but in the end, the whole idea and really the basis behind why they're concerned about Puke is because you have Mother's Milk who steps up and says, okay, so like the soups that he has there, they don't really matter, right? They're not really capable of doing anything. They're not on the same level as the Seven or anything like that. And so when it comes to Puke himself, they're like, this guy's got no real experience with media until he moved out west in 1993, before everything started going on. They say that when it comes to Puke, that he was never really a guy on this level, didn't really have any experience with media until he came out and started working for Vaught American, right? That he's heading up the acquisitions office of Vaught American Petroleum, and then starts working his way up the ranks, which, as anybody in any real job site will tell you, it's not about what you know, it's about who you know. And that's how you find yourself getting promotions, working up, and different things like that. Is it fair? No, but just learn to deal with it and play the game as it's being played, right? Either that, or you can just sit around and be pissed off about it and never go anywhere. And so it's one of those things where they're kind of asking the question, okay, so at the end of the day, if he's running MediaCorp and he has the Scorchers, what's the motivation behind this, right? Is he kind of vying to basically basically take over superhero development at Vought American, what's his angle here, right? What's his end game? And so that's when Mallory steps up and says, okay, there's a little more to this, guys, than you initially think. Now remember, Mallory is an ex-CIA guy, right? He's a former spy, spook, whatever you want to call him, right? He's a guy that operates behind the scenes. And so he has a lot of information on things that have gone on out there when it comes to Vought American, even though the legend really knows a lot more than Mallory does when it comes to the nature of Vought itself. But what he says here is that there was a tribe that was wiped out and another tribe moved in, right? Out there, I think they said it was out in Africa somewhere. And so what Mallory says, kind of picking up after, really picking up with Mother's Milk, is that where the actions of Julian Baxter Pugh with regards to Vought American Petroleum dealt with something called the Grand Savannah Dam, that what had happened is that there was a tribe that had died out there. Now, the way this worked and what it is that Mallory tells us here is that there was a tribe that died and then another tribe moved in. And he says no one told that local tribe that the soil had to basically be farmed with techniques that they weren't used to. And the people who could have told them that were all basically gone. And so he said it's one of the finer points of ethnic cleansing, essentially. And so what he says is that it was noted that at the time, the new tribe were much more receptive to offers from Vought American Petroleum, who wanted their part of the territory for drilling, but nothing could be proven about the failure of the dam. What screwed Vought was the demise of that second tribe by famine, which no one had foreseen, a humanitarian catastrophe that rendered the project beyond toxic in public relations terms. And so what this basically meant is that you had Julian, who wanted to basically set up a kind of drilling operation out by out of the Grand Savannah Dam, but because of the fact that the first tribe was killed, the second tribe moved in, didn't know how to till the land, they died, it turned into a great big huge humanitarian thing. If what Vought had done in the aftermath of that was gone in there and started drilling, it would have pissed off the world. Everybody would have hated Vought American for it. I mean, they would have hated him for a little while, and then like a few weeks later, everybody would have forgotten about it, right? I mean, that's how things work now, but that's what would have happened, right? Everybody would have just been exceedingly mad, right? From a public relations perspective, it would have been a nightmare. So while Vought would have certainly been able to weather the storm, why give yourself a headache if you don't have to? And so that's when Mother's Milk starts connecting the dots based on the assignment that was given to him by Mallory. And where what he basically does is he introduces Stormfront, right? Now, Stormfront in the comics, in the boys' comics, totally different from Stormfront. Well, not really even totally different, but different in a lot of ways from Stormfront from the TV show. But what we're basically told here, at least what Mother's Milk says, is that there was a Vought American internal memo that the legend had sent over to Mother's Milk, and that this was from Victory Comics when they did a charity book for the Grand Savannah Dam. Vought said they could use any characters they wanted, but they couldn't use Stormfront. No public appearances, no using his image in the book. He could not go anywhere near this at all. And so that's when Frenchie asked the question, does Stormfront have the power, or did he have the power to destroy that Savannah Dam in the first place and basically run out that original tribe? And that's when Mallory says, yes, in his little finger, he could have easily done that. And so that's when Mother's Milk's like, I never would have connected this, but it makes perfect sense. That what happened here is that Julian Baxter Pugh wants to use superheroes for things that no one had ever and should ever use them for. That he tried once and he screwed up. That in effect, what Julian Baxter Pugh seemed to have done was use Stormfront to destroy the dam and take out the first tribe. But before Vought American could get in there and start drilling, the second tribe went in there. And then the second tribe died, and that created the whole great big huge humanitarian PR nightmare. That basically Julian Baxter Pugh was trying to generate income for Vought and screwed it up. And so that's when Billy Butcher's like, okay, we need to find out information about Stormfront. And so what he ends up doing is, of course, going to see Vicar. Now, of course, you guys remember Vicar from the last video that we did. The two of them kind of start talking, and it's sort of funny is because as the two of them are having this discussion, one of the things that happens is that the way the marketing is done for Vicar himself, they're all referred to, like him and the people like him are referred to as the children of Stormfront. That is kind of the marketing thing that's set up. Now, of course, you can immediately look at Vicar and know that's not the case. The guy doesn't look anything like Stormfront, and there's obviously no relation there. But for the general public, they absolutely ate it up because that was the nature of the story that was being marketed. But kind of a funny thing happens is that as they're talking, Vicar basically says, speaking of the children of Stormfront, and he basically calls in the other kids that are there, right? All these kind of Thor archetypes, essentially. And so the idea here of Vicar is to quite literally set up an ambush to take out Billy Butcher. Now, here's one of the things to keep in mind. If you're familiar with The Boys as it exists right now, your immediate response is, no way these guys stand a chance. Billy Butcher's way too powerful. But one thing to remember here, Billy Butcher does not have Compound V. He's just a regular guy. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.